Two versions of the galaxy's most dangerous man exist in Star Wars history. One tells the story that most fans know from the movies, while the other reveals a darker and more complete version that shaped decades of storytelling before Disney reset everything. Quickly, before we dive into the Legends version of Darth Sidious, run to the comments section and leave a comment where you're listening to this documentary from. It is fascinating to see how far our lore community stretches and how much we have in common. Now, onto the story. The differences between these two versions of Sheev Palpatine run deeper than most people realize. In current canon, Palpatine appears as a master manipulator who orchestrates the Clone Wars and destroys the Republic through political cunning. His backstory remains mostly hidden, with only hints about his training under Darth Plagueis and his rise to power on Naboo. But Legends Palpatine operates on another level entirely. His story begins decades earlier with a complete family history that explains how darkness took root in his soul. Born in 82 BBY to the noble House Palpatine on Naboo, young Sheev grew up in a toxic household dominated by his father, Kosinga Palpatine. Their relationship was poisonous from the start. Kosinga was a domineering patriarch who frequently clashed with his son's willful and rebellious behavior. He spent considerable wealth covering up Palpatine's dangerous misdeeds to avoid family scandal, which only fueled the young man's growing resentment. By his teens, Palpatine had developed a secret fascination with Sith artifacts and dark lore. This unusual hobby hinted at his latent Force sensitivity and growing obsession with power. The boy who would become the galaxy's ultimate tyrant was already collecting the tools of his future trade. The breaking point came when Darth Plagueis arrived on Naboo in his public persona as Hago Damask, a wealthy moon businessman. Plagueis sensed the dark potential in 17-year-old Palpatine and began a careful seduction. With subtle encouragement from his new mentor, Palpatine finally acted on years of patricidal fantasies. Aboard the family starship, Palpatine used the Force to slam his father into a bulkhead and proceeded to eliminate his entire family and security crew in a sudden outburst of rage. This act of wholesale family annihilation was his irreversible step into darkness and the moment Darth Sidious was truly born. Plagueis covered up the massacre by making it appear like a hyperspace accident. In the aftermath, the moon formally initiated Sheev into the Sith Order aboard his ship. The teenager knelt and swore loyalty, receiving the name Darth Sidious that would strike fear across the galaxy for decades to come. Canon provides none of these crucial details about Palpatine's transformation. The lack of backstory makes his evil feel almost random. Legends shows us exactly how a privileged young man becomes a monster through family trauma, dark mentorship, and conscious decisions to embrace hatred. The scope of their planning differs dramatically between versions. Legends Sidious spent decades methodically engineering his rise through galactic politics. With Plagueis' help, he manipulated Naboo's political landscape and arranged accidents for opponents like Senator Vidar Kim to secure his position in the Galactic Senate. He built networks of influence, secret armies, and Sith cultists throughout the Republic, laying groundwork for domination long before the Clone Wars began. This version portrays a centuries-spanning Sith conspiracy that makes every major galactic event part of their grand design. Canon streamlines these machinations significantly. While Palpatine remains a master schemer, the focus stays on his overt maneuvers during the prequel era without the extensive backstory of preparatory work spanning multiple decades. Their power levels tell completely different stories about what a Sith Master can achieve. Legend Sidious mastered arcane dark side abilities far beyond anything shown in the films. He delved into Sith sorcery and alchemy, learned to create hyperspace force storms that could consume entire fleets, and achieved essence transfer to move between clone bodies and cheat death repeatedly. This version accumulated the combined knowledge of the Sith Order across millennia, giving him an arsenal of supernatural abilities that made him nearly godlike in power. He could drain the life energy of entire planets to sustain himself and wielded techniques that bordered on cosmic in scale. Canon Palpatine is still immensely powerful, but remains more grounded in recognizable Force abilities. His most prominent skills are Force lightning, lightsaber mastery, and political manipulation. The aftermath of their deaths creates the biggest difference between these versions. Canon Palpatine dies at Endor, returns once in a flawed clone body decades later, and gets finally destroyed by Rey with help from all past Jedi. Legend Sidious survives Endor through essence transfer and returns multiple times over several years in the Dark Empire storyline. He rebuilds fleets, creates new superweapons, and nearly conquers the galaxy again before being permanently destroyed when a dying Jedi drags his spirit into the Force itself. His legacy in Legends extends far beyond his death, influencing new generations of Darksiders and Sith cults for decades. Various followers attempt to carry on his teachings, and his shadow affects galactic history for over a century after his final defeat. These differences matter because they show two distinct approaches to the same character. Canon focuses on Palpatine as the architect of one specific conflict within the Skywalker family saga. Legends presents him as a cosmic force of evil whose influence spans generations and whose complete defeat requires multiple heroic efforts across years of struggle. Both versions agree that Darth Sidious represents the ultimate corruption of power and the dangers of unchecked ambition. But only Legends provides the complete picture of how that corruption began and the full scope of what it took to finally end his reign of terror. What follows is the entire story of Darth Sidious according to the Legends timeline. This is the version that dominated Star Wars storytelling for over 30 years and shows the complete rise and fall of the galaxy's most dangerous enemy. Evil is born in the most unexpected places. The boy who would become the galaxy's greatest threat started life in luxury on one of the Republic's most peaceful worlds, surrounded by lakes and rolling hills that should have nurtured goodness instead of hatred. Sheev Palpatine entered the world as the eldest son of an aristocratic family on Naboo. From his earliest years, he was different from other children. While most kids played with toys, young Sheev showed a ruthless streak that worried adults and a sharp intellect that impressed them. His unusual hobbies set him apart from everyone around him. Sheev secretly collected Sith artifacts and studied dark lore with the kind of fascination other children reserved for speeder races or holodramas. This strange obsession hinted at something sleeping inside him that most people couldn't understand. The artifacts called to him in ways he couldn't explain. Ancient Sith holocrons, forbidden texts, and relics from the dark side's bloody history filled hidden corners of his room. Each piece taught him something new about power and how to take it from others. His relationship with his father poisoned everything good in their household. Kosinga Palpatine was a domineering patriarch who controlled his family through fear and intimidation. Every conversation between father and son became a battle of wills that neither would surrender. Kosinga spent huge amounts of money covering up his son's increasingly dangerous behavior. When Sheev's thrill-seeking stunts resulted in innocent people getting hurt or killed, his father made the problems disappear through bribes and influence. Each cover-up only made their relationship worse. The family estate called Convergence became a place where fear lived in every room. Other family members learned to stay quiet and avoid drawing attention to themselves. They could sense the tension building between father and son like a storm waiting to break. Sheev seethed with resentment while his father grew to hate what his eldest child was becoming. Kosinga sometimes wondered if he should have ended things when Sheev was born, seeing in him everything he could never be and everything he feared most. Their household was a powder keg waiting for the right spark. That spark came in the form of a visitor who understood exactly what kind of potential lived inside the angry teenager. Fate intervened when a moon businessman named Hago Damask came to Naboo on what appeared to be a routine political investment errand. Damask was actually Darth Plagueis, one of the two Sith Lords secretly manipulating galactic events from the shadows. Plagueis sensed something special in 17-year-old Sheev during their first meeting. The dark side flowed through the young man like a river waiting to flood its banks. Here was raw potential that could be shaped into something extraordinary. The Sith Lord began a careful seduction that played on everything Sheev already felt about his father and his place in the world. Plagueis understood that the boy's anger was his greatest strength, and his family was holding him back from embracing his true nature. With subtle encouragement from his new mentor, Sheev finally acted on fantasies he had been nursing for years. The moment came aboard the family starship during what should have been a routine trip back to Naboo. 17 years of rage exploded in an instant of terrible violence. Sheev used the Force to slam his father into a bulkhead with enough power to crack his skull. The sound echoed through the ship like thunder announcing a storm. But killing Kosinga was only the beginning. Dark fury consumed Sheev completely as he turned on every other person aboard the vessel. His mother, his siblings, the security crew, everyone who had witnessed his father's death followed Kosinga into oblivion. The massacre was thorough and merciless. Sheev moved through the ship like death itself, eliminating every trace of the family that had shaped and constrained him. When the killing stopped, he was the only living soul left aboard. This act of wholesale family annihilation was his irreversible step into darkness. There was no going back from what he had done, no way to undo the choice that defined the rest of his existence. With his family dead and his old life erased, Sheev reached out to the one person who could help him. Plagueis had orchestrated events to push the young man to this exact point, waiting to see if he would take the final step. The Sith Lord didn't hesitate to provide assistance. He covered up the massacre by making it look like a hyperspace accident that claimed the entire family. Official records would show that equipment failure caused their deaths, not the son who survived through dark miracle. Every piece of evidence that could connect Sheev to the killings disappeared. Plagueis used his wealth and influence to ensure that no investigation would uncover the truth about what really happened aboard that ship. In the aftermath, aboard Plagueis's own vessel, the moment Sheev had been building toward finally arrived. The moon formally initiated the teenager into the ancient Sith Order that had been planning revenge against the Jedi for 1,000 years. Sheev knelt before his new master and swore loyalty to the dark side of the Force. In that moment, his old identity died as completely as his family had. The frightened boy from Naboo was gone forever. Plagueis bestowed upon him the Sith name that would become legend across the galaxy. Darth Sidious reflected the insidious nature that would allow him to hide among his enemies while destroying them from within. This clandestine apprenticeship became the most closely guarded secret of his life. As Sheev Palpatine returned to Naboo to claim his inheritance and begin his public career, no one suspected that Darth Sidious was learning to manipulate the galaxy from the shadows. The boy who had collected Sith artifacts in secret was now becoming the real thing. His training in the dark arts was about to begin in earnest under the guidance of a master who understood exactly how to nurture hatred into something that could topple governments and destroy entire civilizations. The peaceful lakes and rolling hills of Naboo had given birth to the galaxy's greatest monster. The transformation was complete, and the Sith had gained an apprentice whose ambition would eventually surpass even their wildest dreams of revenge. The most dangerous education in galactic history was about to begin. Darth Sidious would spend the next decades learning everything the Sith had discovered about power, manipulation, and the dark side of the Force, under a master who believed they could rule together forever. Darth Plagueis had a vision that broke centuries of Sith tradition. Unlike the typical rule of two dynamic built on mistrust and eventual betrayal, he promised Sidious something different. Together, they would co-rule the dark side, pooling their knowledge instead of competing for supremacy. This partnership would accomplish what no Sith had achieved before. They would execute the grand plan that had been brewing for 1,000 years since Darth Bane established the rule of two. The Republic would fall, the Jedi would be destroyed, and the Sith would openly rule the galaxy. Plagueis began molding his new apprentice through the most intense training program imaginable. Every lesson was designed to break Sidious down and rebuild him into something stronger and more ruthless than before. The physical trials pushed Sidious to his limits and beyond. Plagueis took him on deadly hunts across dangerous worlds where one mistake meant death. He pitted his apprentice against combat droids on Hypori, forcing Sidious to develop his lightsaber skills through actual life-or-death combat. The psychological conditioning was even more brutal. On distant Kursid, Plagueis had Sidious ritually slaughter sentient warriors to harden his resolve and eliminate any remaining compassion. Each kill made the next one easier until taking life became as natural as breathing. But the real treasures came from the knowledge Plagueis shared. He gave Sidious access to the complete Sith archives, a collection of holocrons and texts containing 1,000 years of dark side wisdom. These were secrets that most Sith never learned, preserved by masters across generations. Through these ancient teachings, Sidious absorbed the philosophies of legendary Sith lords. Darth Bane taught him about the rule of two and how to hide in plain sight. Darth Malgus showed him how to channel rage into unstoppable power. Sorza's Sin revealed the mysteries of Sith alchemy and the creation of monsters. Each lesson built upon the last as Sidious synthesized these teachings into his own understanding of power. He learned mind-clouding techniques that could hide his dark side presence from even the most sensitive Jedi. Pain and fear became tools he could wield like weapons against his enemies. Most importantly, Plagueis shared his most coveted research into cheating death itself. The ancient Sith had always sought immortality, but Plagueis was closer than anyone to actually achieving it. His experiments with midi-chlorian manipulation promised the power to create life and prevent death through sheer will. While Sidious absorbed these cosmic secrets, Plagueis used his public identity to advance their political agenda. As Hago Damask, he controlled a banking empire that gave him influence throughout the galaxy. Damask holdings could make or break entire star systems through financial pressure. Plagueis began inserting his apprentice into high society and political circles across the core worlds. Sidious learned to charm senators, manipulate businessmen, and identify useful allies who could be turned into unwitting pawns. One of his most important early connections was Sate Pestage, who became a close aide and eventually a key player in their schemes. Pestage represented the kind of ambitious but limited person that Sidious could use without worrying about them becoming a threat. The Sith duo tested their growing network through increasingly bold operations. When Senator Vidar Kim of Naboo posed an obstacle to their plans, they decided to remove him permanently. The assassination needed to be public and spectacular to send the right message. Sidious coordinated with Pestage to hire a Maladian assassin for the job. The killer struck during a speeder attack that left Kim dead and his Jedi son Ronhar barely alive. The murder was meant to be obvious, creating a ripple of fear through the political establishment. The plan worked perfectly. With Kim dead, the Naboo Senate seat opened up for a new candidate. At 30 years old, Palpatine stepped forward as the obvious choice to represent his homeworld in the Galactic Senate. His election marked the beginning of his double life as both a respected senator and a secret Sith apprentice. Publicly, Palpatine was the perfect legislator. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and never seemed to push his own agenda too aggressively. Behind this modest facade, he was already manipulating his new colleagues with skills learned from his Sith training. Every conversation was a chance to plant seeds of doubt, gather intelligence, or identify potential allies and enemies. One of his most cynical manipulations involved Ronhar Kim, the Jedi son of the senator he had helped eliminate. Palpatine approached Ronhar at his father's funeral and struck up what appeared to be a genuine friendship based on shared grief and mutual respect. In reality, Sidious was using Ronhar as a long-term asset within the Jedi Order. Over the years, he convinced the young knight to propose ideas that would serve Sith interests, like requiring all Jedi to publicly swear loyalty to the Chancellor. This pattern of false friendship would become a hallmark of Sidious's method. He could fake genuine affection and concern so convincingly that even Jedi Knights believed in his sincerity. When the time came, Ronhar would die in the Clone Wars under circumstances that Sidious carefully arranged. Throughout these early decades in the Senate, Sidious and Plagueis worked methodically to weaken the Republic from within. They funded insurrections on distant worlds, fomented corruption in government agencies, and encouraged star systems to lose faith in democratic institutions. Their influence reached into the corporate sector as well. Plagueis's financial empire allowed them to manipulate megacorporations like the Trade Federation, preparing these organizations for the roles they would play in the coming war. During this period, they also became aware of something that would change their plans dramatically. A remarkable vergence in the Force had occurred on Tatooine with the birth of Anakin Skywalker, a boy the Jedi believed might be the prophesied chosen one. Plagueis briefly considered trying to capture or influence Anakin directly, but circumstances made this impossible. Instead, Sidious filed away this information for future use, sensing that the boy's destiny would somehow intersect with their own plans. As the years passed and Sidious grew stronger in both political influence and dark side power, subtle changes began affecting their partnership. Plagueis became increasingly focused on his immortality experiments, spending more time in his laboratories and less time on their joint schemes. The Moon Master's obsession with cheating death made him complacent about other threats. He trusted that his apprentice remained completely loyal and would never consider betraying him. This trust would prove to be a fatal mistake. Deep within his mind, Sidious was already contemplating the inevitable conclusion of their relationship. The rule of two demanded that the apprentice eventually overthrow the master. No matter what Plagueis had promised about co-ruling, ancient Sith tradition would not be denied. The question was no longer whether Sidious would eliminate his master, but when and how. The patient apprentice who had learned everything Plagueis could teach was beginning to plan for the day when Darth Sidious would become the sole Dark Lord of the Sith. The galaxy had no idea that two of its most influential figures were secret enemies of everything civilization represented. Soon, their carefully laid plans would begin moving toward a climax that would reshape the Republic forever. The most brilliant political manipulation in galactic history began with a simple trade dispute. Darth Sidious was about to prove that the right crisis at the right time could topple governments and elevate senators to supreme power. Sidious set his masterpiece in motion by targeting something that affected every world in the galaxy: trade routes and the credits that flowed through them. He influenced the Trade Federation to protest a newly passed Republic tax on Outer Rim commerce that cut into their massive profits. The Neimoidians who ran the Trade Federation were greedy, but not particularly brave. They needed encouragement to take the kind of bold action that Sidious required for his plan. He provided that encouragement by appearing to them as an anonymous Sith Lord who promised political protection in exchange for their cooperation. Viceroy Newt Gunray and his allies fell for the deception completely. Under Sidious's orders, they assembled a fleet of battleships and imposed a total blockade around Naboo, preventing any ships from reaching or leaving the peaceful planet. The choice of target was perfect for Sidious's purposes. As Naboo's senator, Palpatine would naturally be concerned about his homeworld's welfare. The crisis would give him the moral authority to speak out against government inaction while positioning him as a leader during a time of uncertainty. When the blockade escalated into a full invasion, Sidious fanned the flames from both sides. He ordered the Neimoidians to capture Queen Padme Amidala and occupy the planet while ensuring that the Senate on Coruscant remained paralyzed by bureaucratic delays and endless debates. Queen Amidala's escape from Naboo played directly into Sidious's hands. When she arrived on Coruscant seeking help from the Republic, she found a government that seemed incapable of decisive action. The Senate was trapped in procedural arguments while her people suffered under droid occupation. Palpatine positioned himself as her ally and guide through the complex political landscape of the capital. He offered sympathy for her plight while subtly coaching her toward the dramatic action that would serve his purposes. The young queen trusted his advice because he seemed to be the only senator who truly understood the urgency of her situation. When Palpatine suggested that Chancellor Finis Valorum was too weak to help her people, she listened with growing frustration. Valorum's office was indeed bogged down by corrupt delegates and political maneuvering that prevented swift action. This delay wasn't accidental. Sidious had spent years placing obstacles in the government's path to ensure that when the right crisis came, the Republic would prove inadequate to handle it. Amidala's patience finally broke during a Senate session where delegate after delegate offered empty words while her people continued to suffer. Following Palpatine's guidance, she made a decision that changed galactic history forever. The vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum sent shockwaves through the political establishment. For the first time in decades, the chancellorship was suddenly vacant, creating an opportunity that ambitious politicians had only dreamed about. Palpatine's manipulation of the young queen's frustration had triggered exactly the chain of events he needed. Valorum was swept from office in a wave of senatorial anger, leaving the Republic without leadership during its greatest crisis in generations. The Chancellor election became a three-way contest between experienced politicians who had been preparing for this moment their entire careers. Bail Antilles of Alderaan and Ainli Team of Malastare were considered the frontrunners with decades of political experience behind them. Palpatine returned to Naboo to announce his candidacy, playing the role of the humble patriot who reluctantly accepted the burden of leadership during his homeworld's darkest hour. His modest demeanor and apparent reluctance made him appear more trustworthy than his ambitious rivals. Behind the scenes, forces were working to ensure his victory. Darth Plagueis used his vast wealth and network of contacts to pull favors among the galactic elite. Corporate leaders, banking clans, and influential families found themselves subtly encouraged to support the senator from Naboo. Sidious took more direct action to eliminate obstacles to his election. Several key senators who might have voted for his opponents suffered mysterious accidents or sudden deaths. Sun Guard mercenaries carried out these assassinations with professional efficiency, leaving no evidence connecting the crimes to Palpatine's campaign. The result was exactly what Sidious had engineered from the beginning. Palpatine won election as Supreme Chancellor by an overwhelming margin, seen as a unifying and moderate choice during a time of unprecedented crisis. The galaxy celebrated the elevation of a leader who seemed to represent the best qualities of democratic government. In reality, they had just handed absolute power to their greatest enemy, who had orchestrated the very crisis that swept him into office. Meanwhile, events on Naboo were reaching their climax as Queen Amidala launched her desperate counterattack against the Trade Federation occupation. Jedi Knights had become involved in the conflict, creating complications that Sidious hadn't fully anticipated. His apprentice Darth Maul finally revealed himself during the Battle of Naboo, emerging from decades of secrecy to duel the Jedi who threatened their plans. The confrontation went both better and worse than Sidious had hoped. Maul succeeded in killing Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn, eliminating a potential threat to their schemes. But Obi-Wan Kenobi's unexpected victory left the Sith apprentice apparently dead, cut in half, and fallen into a reactor shaft. This was an unexpected setback for Sidious, who had spent years training Maul to be his perfect weapon. The loss meant he would need to find and train a new apprentice while managing his new responsibilities as Chancellor. Publicly, Chancellor Palpatine expressed sympathy for the Jedi losses while praising Queen Amidala's courage in liberating her people. The galaxy saw a leader who mourned the fallen while celebrating the victory of good over evil. As the dust settled from the crisis, Palpatine began his new role with widespread support from across the political spectrum. The humble senator who had reluctantly accepted the burden of leadership was actually the mastermind who had engineered every aspect of the conflict. That same night, as the galaxy celebrated the peaceful resolution of the Naboo crisis, Darth Sidious made the final move in his rise to ultimate power. Darth Plagueis had served his purpose and now represented the only remaining obstacle to complete control. During the victory celebration, Sidious got his master intoxicated and waited for the perfect moment to strike. In the dead of night, while Plagueis slept peacefully in his chambers, his apprentice unleashed a torrent of Force lightning that ended the moon's life. The assassination fulfilled the ancient rule of two that demanded apprentices eventually overthrow their masters. Plagueis was too weak to prevent his own death, proving that Sidious had indeed surpassed him in power and cunning. In that moment, Darth Sidious achieved the dual pinnacle of authority that no Sith had ever held before. He was simultaneously the sole Dark Lord of the Sith and the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, controlling both the light and dark sides of galactic civilization. To the galaxy at large, he remained the humble servant of democracy who had reluctantly accepted leadership during a time of crisis. In reality, he had just completed the most successful political manipulation in history while positioning himself to execute the next phase of the grand plan. The Sith had waited 1,000 years for this moment. Now their greatest champion sat at the heart of the Republic, trusted by billions, while secretly working to destroy everything they held dear. The final phase of their revenge was about to begin. Building a dictatorship takes patience when you need to convince the galaxy that democracy is dying by accident. Chancellor Palpatine spent the next 10 years slowly strangling the Republic while making it look like he was trying to save it. His first moves were subtle but crucial for long-term control. Palpatine appointed close allies to key positions throughout the government, placing people who either knew his true identity or were fanatically loyal to him personally. Mas Amedda became vice chair of the Senate, giving Sidious a trusted agent who could manipulate proceedings when needed. Sly Moore, one of his Force-sensitive aides, became his administrative aide with access to the most sensitive information flowing through his office. These insiders created a protective bubble around the Chancellor that made it nearly impossible for enemies to get close enough to discover his secrets. They also ensured that his will was carried out even when he couldn't be directly involved in sensitive operations. Palpatine cultivated a public image as the reluctant leader who kept accepting greater responsibilities because the Republic needed strong guidance. He easily won re-election to a second term due to his popularity among ordinary citizens who saw him as an effective reformer. When his second term was scheduled to end, the growing separatist crisis provided the perfect excuse to extend his tenure indefinitely. The Senate amended the Constitution to suspend regular elections during the emergency, giving Palpatine legal authority to remain in power as long as the crisis continued. Each emergency decree gave him more authority to bypass normal laws and procedures. The longer he stayed in office, the more power he accumulated, setting the stage for the dictatorship he was building, one legal precedent at a time. Meanwhile, Sidious needed to replace the apprentice he had lost during the Naboo crisis. He found the perfect candidate in Count Dooku of Sereno, a disillusioned Jedi master who had left the Order after Qui-Gon's death. Dooku was disgusted with the Republic's corruption and the Jedi Council's willingness to serve a government that seemed increasingly ineffective. His growing cynicism made him vulnerable to the right kind of persuasion from someone who understood his frustrations. Sidious began courting the former Jedi with careful words about the need for stronger leadership and more decisive action. He showed Dooku that the Republic's problems ran deeper than simple corruption and required radical solutions that the Jedi were too naive to consider. The seduction took several years, but eventually Dooku embraced the dark side and became Darth Tyrannus, Sidious's new Sith apprentice. The former Jedi brought valuable connections and knowledge that would prove crucial for the next phase of their plan. Through Tyrannus, Sidious initiated the most audacious deception in galactic history. He ordered his new apprentice to secretly commission a clone army for the Republic, using the identity of Jedi Master Sidious as cover. The Kaminoans began growing millions of clone troopers in complete secrecy, programming them for absolute loyalty to the Chancellor. This army would serve as the Republic's salvation during the coming war, while also being the weapon that would destroy the Jedi when the time was right. Sidious also had Tyrannus begin gathering disparate factions into what would become the Separatist Alliance. Commerce guilds upset about regulations, star systems frustrated with taxation, and corporations seeking greater independence were quietly encouraged to consider leaving the Republic. With Plagueis gone, Sidious finally had the freedom to pursue his own dark side experiments without oversight. He continued his master's research into extending life while studying ancient Sith arts that promised even greater power. Hidden laboratories on remote worlds like Byss and Wayland became his private workshops for storing Sith artifacts and conducting experiments that would horrify civilized beings. These facilities would prove crucial for his later plans to achieve true immortality. During these years, Sidious also began one of his most important long-term projects. He started grooming young Anakin Skywalker as a potential future asset, offering the boy guidance and flattery whenever he visited Coruscant. Palpatine positioned himself as the understanding father figure that Anakin had never had, someone who appreciated his potential in ways that the Jedi Council seemed reluctant to acknowledge. This relationship would eventually become the key to destroying the Jedi Order from within. One of Sidious's most ruthless operations during this period involved the Outbound Flight Project, a Jedi-led expedition to explore beyond the galaxy. He feared that successful Jedi colonies outside his reach could become refuges for survivors of his planned purge. Using his agent Kinman Doriana, Sidious manipulated a Chiss commander named Thrawn into attacking the expedition in the unknown regions. The brilliant alien tactician was convinced that the Jedi ship could provoke a dangerous invasion from hostile forces. Thrawn's attack wiped out the entire expedition, eliminating Jedi Master Joruus C'baoth and several other potential threats, while testing the capabilities of a future ally. This operation showed how Sidious could eliminate enemies while maintaining complete deniability. The incident also demonstrated his willingness to reveal his true identity to trusted allies when necessary. Palpatine later admitted to Mas Amedda that he had personally ordered Outbound Flight's destruction, binding his aide to secrecy through the knowledge of his Sith identity. By this time, the galaxy was visibly fracturing as star systems grew increasingly frustrated with the Republic's ineffective government. Count Dooku emerged publicly as the leader of a secessionist movement that attracted dozens of worlds seeking alternatives to corrupt central authority. The Confederacy of Independent Systems grew rapidly as major corporations and disillusioned governments rallied to Dooku's call for independence. Behind the scenes, Dooku and Sidious carefully orchestrated this growth, recruiting specific groups that would serve their purposes in the coming war. Palpatine publicly lamented the Separatist crisis while secretly fueling the very forces that were tearing the Republic apart. He appeared to be a leader struggling to hold the galaxy together while actually engineering its division for his own purposes. The final steps toward open warfare required perfect timing and a pretext that would justify the extreme measures Sidious needed to implement. He found that pretext in assassination attempts against Senator Padme Amidala, the former Queen of Naboo. These attacks were actually ordered by Sidious himself and carried out by Jango Fett at Dooku's direction. The goal was to create enough fear and chaos to justify granting the Chancellor emergency powers that would normally be unthinkable in a democracy. When Padme could no longer safely serve in the Senate, her representative Jar Jar Binks stepped forward with the Military Creation Act that would authorize the Republic to raise a grand army. The Senate was so frightened by the Separatist threat that they granted Palpatine sweeping authority to bypass normal laws. At Palpatine's direction, the secret clone army on Kamino was revealed to the galaxy and placed at the Republic's disposal. To most observers, this seemed like a miraculous stroke of good fortune that would save the Republic from destruction. In reality, Sidious now controlled both sides of the coming conflict. He commanded the Republic's clone army as Chancellor while directing the Separatist forces through his apprentice Dooku. The Clone Wars were about to begin, with the Sith Master pulling strings on both sides of the battlefield. The patient apprentice who had learned everything from Darth Plagueis was now ready to execute the final phase of the grand plan. The Republic would tear itself apart in a war designed to eliminate the Jedi and transform democracy into dictatorship, all while the galaxy's greatest enemy sat at the heart of their government, wearing the mask of their protector. The greatest deception in galactic history was about to unfold as the Clone Wars erupted across thousands of star systems. Chancellor Palpatine would fight this war from both sides while convincing everyone he was trying to end it as quickly as possible. The spark that ignited the galaxy came on Geonosis when Separatist forces confronted Jedi and Republic troops in the first major battle of what would become a 3-year nightmare. But the invisible hand guiding every move belonged to Darth Sidious, who had engineered this conflict as the ultimate trap for his enemies. As the war began, Palpatine assumed emergency powers that transformed him from a civilian leader into a supreme military commander. He assured the Senate that he loved democracy and would gladly return these authorities once the crisis ended. In reality, he had no intention of ever giving up control again. The Clone Wars became Sidious's masterpiece of manipulation as he played both sides with perfect skill. As Chancellor Palpatine, he projected calm resolve while appointing Jedi as generals and acting like a leader desperately trying to preserve the Republic against overwhelming odds. As Darth Sidious, he secretly commanded the Separatist Council through Count Dooku, ensuring the war continued in a carefully balanced stalemate. This dual role allowed him to control every major battle and campaign from behind the scenes. For every Republic victory, he deliberately allowed a Separatist counterstroke that kept the conflict going. The war needed to last long enough to exhaust both sides and make the galaxy desperate for any leader strong enough to bring peace through decisive action. Palpatine steadily accumulated more authority through wartime legislation that chipped away at democratic institutions. The Senate passed the Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act, giving him direct oversight of the Jedi and regional governors throughout the Republic. He formed the Red Guard as an elite corps of crimson-clad protectors ostensibly for his personal security. In reality, many of these guards were candidates for dark side training who would eventually serve the empire he was building in secret. His office created intelligence and security bureaus that answered only to him, bypassing traditional checks and balances that might have exposed his activities. Each new emergency measure gave him tools that no chancellor in Republic history had ever possessed. Late in the war, Palpatine even managed to amend the Constitution to remove term limits, meaning he could legally remain chancellor as long as the emergency continued. Democracy was being dismantled one legal precedent at a time. Meanwhile, Sidious continued building the network of dark side agents that would serve his future empire. Project Inquisitorius recruited fallen Jedi and other Force-sensitive beings who were turned to the dark side and trained to hunt enemies of the New Order. These operatives remained hidden during the war, waiting for the moment when they would emerge as the Emperor's enforcers. Sidious understood that controlling the galaxy would require more than just military might. He needed supernatural agents who could track down Force users and crush resistance wherever it appeared. He also used the war to eliminate loose ends that might threaten his plans. Asajj Ventress, Count Dooku's deadly apprentice, was marked for death when she grew too powerful and independent. Dooku betrayed her on Sidious's orders, proving his loyalty while removing a potential rival. An even more personal threat emerged when Darth Maul returned from apparent death. The former apprentice had improbably survived being cut in half and was now building a criminal empire called the Shadow Collective that could challenge Sith authority. Sidious personally intervened to deal with this threat, confronting Maul on Mandalore in a ferocious duel that proved the Master was still far superior to his former student. He killed Maul's brother, Savage Opress, and captured the fallen apprentice, subjecting him to torture and imprisonment. This confrontation served multiple purposes beyond just eliminating Maul as a rival. Sidious used his captive former apprentice as bait to draw out Mother Talzin, the leader of the Night Sisters, who represented another potential threat to his plans. All these schemes were secondary to his most important project during the war. Palpatine spent years carefully nurturing Anakin Skywalker's psychology, positioning himself as the understanding mentor that the young Jedi desperately needed. He frequently praised Anakin's battle exploits while subtly undermining the Jedi Council's authority. Palpatine planted seeds of doubt by suggesting that the Council didn't fully appreciate Anakin's potential or trust him with the respect he deserved. Most crucially, Palpatine learned about Anakin's secret marriage to Padme Amidala and his deepest fear of losing the people he loved. This fear became the key that Sidious would eventually use to unlock Anakin's transformation into his new apprentice. As the war progressed, Palpatine fed Anakin's anxieties with carefully chosen stories about ancient Sith powers that could prevent death itself. He was priming the young Jedi for the terrible choice that would complete his fall to the dark side. By the third year of the war, all the pieces were in place for Sidious's final gambit. General Grievous and Count Dooku launched what appeared to be a desperate separatist offensive that reached the core worlds and threatened the Republic capital itself. The daring raid that captured Chancellor Palpatine from the heart of Coruscant seemed like the separatists' boldest stroke yet. In reality, Sidious had orchestrated his own kidnapping as the endgame that would deliver everything he had been working toward. The rescue mission that followed played out exactly as he had foreseen. Jedi Knights Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi boarded Grievous's flagship to save their Chancellor, walking directly into the trap that had been 3 years in the making. When Anakin dueled Count Dooku in the ship's observation deck, Palpatine provided the gentle encouragement that pushed the young Jedi over a line he had never crossed before. The simple words, "Do it," were all it took to make Anakin execute a helpless prisoner in cold blood. This moment marked Anakin's first major step toward the dark side, while also serving Sidious's practical needs. With Dooku dead, the path was clear for Anakin to become the new Sith apprentice, while the Separatist leadership was left without their primary coordinator. Palpatine returned to the Senate as a hero who had survived capture and helped expose the enemy's desperation. The Clone Wars were nearly over, but their true purpose had been achieved. The Jedi were scattered across the galaxy. The Republic was ready to accept dictatorship, and Anakin Skywalker was primed for his final fall. Everything Darth Sidious had planned for decades was about to come to fruition. The greatest Jedi trap in history was ready to spring, and the galaxy had no idea that their trusted Chancellor was actually their greatest enemy, preparing to reveal himself at last. The moment that changed galactic history forever started with a nightmare about the woman Anakin loved most. Darth Sidious was about to complete the greatest deception ever attempted by turning the Chosen One into his weapon for destroying the Jedi. After his rescue from the Separatists, Chancellor Palpatine wasted no time exploiting the situation to tighten his grip on power. He declared that General Grievous and the remaining Separatist holdouts needed to be crushed quickly to end the war once and for all. When the Jedi Council grew suspicious of Palpatine's long tenure and expanding authority, they pressed him to start giving up his emergency powers. The Chancellor feigned cooperation while actually delaying any real action that would reduce his control. Palpatine's next move was brilliantly calculated to drive a wedge between Anakin and the Jedi Council. He had Anakin appointed as his personal representative on the Council, creating an impossible situation that satisfied no one. The other Jedi Masters were forced to accept Anakin into their ranks, but refused to grant him the rank of Master. This deliberate slight fed directly into the young Jedi's growing frustration with an institution that seemed determined to hold him back despite his obvious abilities. Palpatine sensed that Anakin was tormented by nightmares about Padme dying in childbirth, visions that filled the young Jedi with desperate fear. This terror became the opening that Sidious had been waiting years to exploit through his most masterful manipulation yet. During a casual conversation at the Galactic Opera, Palpatine shared what appeared to be an ancient legend about Darth Plagueis the Wise. This Sith Lord supposedly possessed the power to save others from dying through manipulation of the Force itself. The story was perfectly crafted to plant seeds in Anakin's mind about possibilities that the Jedi would never explore. Palpatine hinted strongly that Plagueis had been his own master, and that such incredible abilities could be learned by someone willing to embrace the dark side. Shortly after this conversation, Palpatine decided the time had come to reveal his true identity. He told Anakin directly that he was the Sith Lord the Jedi had been searching for, openly offering to teach him the dark side arts that could preserve Padme's life. Anakin was shocked and conflicted by this revelation, but the damage was already done. Even though he reported Palpatine's confession to Jedi Master Mace Windu, part of him now saw Sidious as the only being in the galaxy who might be able to save his wife. Mace Windu responded to this intelligence by assembling a strike team of 4 masters to arrest the Chancellor immediately. What followed was one of the most devastating battles in Jedi history as Darth Sidious finally revealed his true power. The moment the Jedi ignited their lightsabers, the Chancellor transformed into a whirlwind of dark side fury that no one was prepared to face. Drawing upon decades of hidden strength, Sidious sprang into combat with speed and skill that seemed impossible for someone his age. He killed 3 of the 4 Jedi Masters in a matter of seconds, moving so fast that they barely had time to defend themselves. Only Mace Windu proved capable of matching the Sith Lord's incredible abilities. Their duel revealed the terrifying power that Palpatine had been concealing throughout his entire political career, showing glimpses of what the dark side could accomplish in the hands of a true master. The battle raged through the Chancellor's office as these two titans of the Force clashed with everything they possessed. Eventually, Windu managed to disarm Palpatine and corner him, apparently gaining the upper hand through his mastery of lightsaber combat. At that crucial moment, Anakin Skywalker arrived to find Windu standing over the helpless Chancellor with his lightsaber raised for a killing blow. Sidious seized this opportunity to play the role of a weak and frail victim being attacked by traitorous Jedi. When Palpatine unleashed Force lightning at Windu, the Jedi Master deflected it back with his lightsaber. The feedback from this attack disfigured the Chancellor's face, revealing the pale and twisted visage that had been hidden beneath his political mask for decades. Sidious used even this apparent setback to his advantage, moaning that the Jedi were traitors trying to take over the Republic. When Windu insisted that Palpatine was too dangerous to leave alive, Anakin finally made the choice that sealed his fate. The young Jedi severed Windu's lightsaber hand in a moment of desperate panic, leaving the Master defenseless against the Sith Lord's renewed attack. Sidious blasted Windu with full Force lightning and hurled him out a shattered window to his death far below. As Anakin knelt in anguish over what he had done, Sidious smiled with triumph. The turn was complete, and the Chosen One now belonged to the dark side through his own actions rather than mere words or promises. Anakin pledged himself to Darth Sidious in return for the knowledge to save Padme, accepting the Sith name Darth Vader that would become legend across the galaxy. Without pausing to savor this victory, Sidious immediately put his new apprentice to work. Order 66 went out across the galaxy as clone troopers received the secret command that branded all Jedi as traitors to the Republic. In an instant, the loyal soldiers who had fought beside the Jedi for 3 years turned their weapons on their former commanders. The Great Jedi Purge began in earnest as Jedi Masters, Knights, and Padawans were cut down by the very troops they had led into battle. Decades of careful planning by the Sith had programmed this betrayal into the clone army from its very creation. On Coruscant, Darth Vader led the 501st Legion in an assault on the Jedi Temple itself. The night that became known as the Nightfall saw the sacred sanctuary of the Jedi Order transformed into a battlefield where no one was spared. Vader and his troops stormed through the temple, killing everyone they encountered, from the greatest masters to the youngest children. The man who had once dreamed of freeing all slaves now participated in the slaughter of innocents without hesitation or mercy. As the Jedi fell across the galaxy, Palpatine addressed the Senate in an emergency session that would reshape civilization forever. He appeared before the assembled representatives as a scarred survivor of what he claimed was a Jedi assassination attempt. Playing the role of a wounded leader who had barely escaped death, Palpatine declared that the Jedi Rebellion had been crushed through the quick action of the loyal clone army. The Senate listened in shock as he described how the peacekeepers they had trusted had actually been plotting treason. In the same speech that condemned the Jedi, Palpatine announced that the Republic would be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire for the safety and security of all citizens. The thunderous applause that greeted this proclamation marked the death of democracy. The Senate eagerly endorsed Palpatine's transformation into Emperor, trading their freedom for the promise of strong leadership during uncertain times. A republic that had stood for 25,000 years died to enthusiastic cheering from the very people it had been designed to serve. With the political transformation complete, Sidious moved to eliminate the last loose ends from his carefully orchestrated war. He dispatched Darth Vader to Mustafar to wipe out the Separatist Council and officially end the Clone Wars. Vader carried out these executions with cold efficiency, killing Newt Gunray and the other CIS leaders who had unknowingly served Sidious's purposes throughout the conflict. With their deaths, the Separatist droid armies shut down permanently. One final challenge remained before Sidious could claim complete victory. Grand Master Yoda had survived the initial purge and now sought to confront the Sith Lord directly in his moment of triumph. The duel between Sidious and Yoda in the Senate chamber became a battle between the greatest masters of light and dark that the galaxy had ever seen. Neither combatant could achieve decisive victory in their epic confrontation, but Yoda was eventually forced to retreat after being blasted from the Chancellor's podium by Sidious's Force lightning. The ancient Jedi Master recognized that he had failed and went into exile on Dagobah. Sidious's laughter echoed through the empty Senate hall as he proclaimed that the Jedi were finally no more. Yoda's escape meant little now that the Order itself had been shattered beyond any hope of rebuilding. By the end of this terrible day, almost every Jedi in the galaxy had been exterminated. Only a handful of survivors like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda remained in hiding, while the Sith achieved the revenge they had been planning for 1,000 years. Darth Sidious now sat unchallenged as Emperor over the galaxy, with Darth Vader at his side as the new Sith Apprentice. The era of the Galactic Empire had begun, and with it came the open rule of the dark side for the first time in galactic history. The public saw their new emperor as a benevolent leader, bringing peace after years of devastating war. In private, Sidious and Vader began implementing the Great Jedi Purge to hunt down any remaining Force users and ensure that the light side could never threaten their dominion again. Running a galactic dictatorship requires more than just winning the throne. Emperor Palpatine was about to spend the next 2 decades transforming from a hidden manipulator into an open tyrant who ruled through fear and supernatural terror. With the Jedi Order destroyed and the Empire established, Palpatine moved quickly to centralize all political power in his own hands. The Imperial Senate continued to exist but became nothing more than a powerless body that rubber-stamped his decisions. He installed regional governors called Moffs to enforce his will in each sector of the galaxy. Any senator who dared to voice dissent found their concerns either ignored completely or answered with punishment that served as a warning to others. Over the following years, Palpatine issued decree after decree that stripped away the rights that citizens had enjoyed under the Republic. His policies promoted humans above all other species, feeding into the xenophobia that would become a hallmark of Imperial rule. The Imperial military expanded to sizes never seen before as Palpatine built the war machine he would need to maintain control over thousands of star systems. His new residence symbolized this transformation perfectly as he moved into the Imperial Palace built on the site of the former Jedi Temple. Darth Vader became the Emperor's most visible enforcer, dispatched across the galaxy to crush opposition and hunt down any surviving Jedi. Together, Sidious and Vader enacted the Great Jedi Purge, using special teams that included the elite 501st Legion and clone commandos. But Palpatine had prepared more than just military solutions for maintaining control. He activated networks of dark side agents that had been secretly trained during the Clone Wars, including the Imperial Inquisitors, who answered directly to Vader and himself. These former Jedi and other Force-sensitive beings who had been turned to the dark side spread throughout the galaxy to track down Force-sensitive children and eliminate anyone who might rebuild the Jedi Order. They represented a supernatural enforcement arm that no rebellion could prepare for. Among his most trusted agents was Mara Jade, whom Palpatine trained as an Emperor's hand. She could hear his voice anywhere in the galaxy and carry out covert missions, including assassinations and intelligence gathering that regular Imperial forces couldn't handle. Other operatives like Jarek and Kronal worked in the shadows as Dark Jedi Inquisitors and Sith Spy Masters. This network of dark side enforcers operated outside the regular military hierarchy, ensuring that the Empire's rule had a sinister supernatural edge whenever needed. Palpatine also began manifesting his Sith identity more openly now that he no longer needed to hide behind a political mask. He often appeared in public wearing a dark hooded cloak, his face showing the scars from what was officially described as a Jedi assassination attempt. Over time, the Emperor withdrew from day-to-day public appearances, preferring to rule through delegates while building a fearsome reputation. Dissent was crushed by the Imperial Security Bureau and Compor, the Commission for the Protection of the Republic that had been transformed into another tool of oppression. Entire planetary populations found themselves subjugated under Imperial rule. The Wookiees of Kashyyyk were enslaved and forced to provide labor for Palpatine's secret projects, showing how far the Empire would go to exploit any species it deemed useful. The ultimate symbol of Imperial oppression was Project Death Star, the secret superweapon program that Sidious had authorized near the end of the Clone Wars. Now, under Grand Moff Tarkin's direction, the first Death Star battle station was nearing completion. Sidious saw this weapon as the ultimate tool of fear that would keep star systems in line when loyalty failed. He told Tarkin and Vader that fear of the battle station would maintain control more effectively than any traditional military force. Despite his near-total control, Palpatine faced several early challenges to his authority. Imperial officer Trakta conspired with stormtroopers to stage a coup, while Grand Moff Gentis attempted assassination using a deadly bioweapon that infected the Imperial palace. The Gentis plot came closer to success than anyone realized. Palpatine was exposed to a lethal virus and nearly died before using his dark side abilities to sustain himself long enough for an antidote to be administered. His revenge on the conspirators was swift and brutal. These incidents convinced Sidious to further streamline military loyalty by replacing clone troopers with birth-born stormtroopers who had been indoctrinated from childhood. Compnor youth programs were established to instill fanatical devotion to the Emperor from an early age. The Empire became as much a religious cult devoted to Palpatine as it was a political state. Governors and officials throughout the galaxy learned that the Emperor's will was absolute and that questioning his decisions meant risking their lives. Under Sidious's rule, secret projects flourished as he pursued his obsession with dark power and immortality. Research facilities were established in the deep core and unknown regions to study forbidden science and ancient Sith arts away from prying eyes. He continued the experiments that Plagueis had abandoned, delving into cloning technology and essence transfer techniques that promised true immortality. On the deep core world of Byss, Palpatine created a private retreat that became saturated with dark side energy. Millions of unwilling colonists were transported to Byss, where their life energies were slowly drained to amplify the Emperor's own lifespan. This horrific process transformed Byss into a dark side nexus while serving Palpatine's quest for eternal life. The world also became the storage site for spare clone bodies and would later house a massive secret armada. Palpatine compiled volumes of Sith lore, including the Book of Anger and Book of Sith, while training select adepts in minor dark side teachings. These students learned enough to serve him effectively, but never enough to pose a challenge to his authority. The Emperor understood that sharing too much knowledge with subordinates could create rivals who might eventually threaten his position. Despite the surveillance and fear that permeated Imperial society, resistance began growing in scattered pockets across the galaxy. Palpatine's oppressive policies toward alien species and political freedoms sparked insurgencies that started small but gradually gained momentum. Initially, these were just guerrilla cells like Saw Gerrera's partisans who conducted isolated attacks against Imperial targets. Sidious largely dismissed these groups as minor nuisances that local forces could handle without his direct involvement. However, as years passed, some former senators like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma began nurturing the idea of a wider rebellion. Along with surviving Jedi like Obi-Wan and Yoda, they worked to connect disparate resistance groups into something more dangerous. By the time anti-Imperial rebel activity was rising significantly, these scattered cells had begun unifying into the Alliance to restore the Republic. Palpatine remained unconcerned about this development, trusting that the Death Star would provide the ultimate answer to any rebellion. When the Death Star finally became operational, Palpatine reached a major milestone in his consolidation of power. Around the same time, he made the decisive move to dissolve the Imperial Senate permanently, sweeping away the last vestige of the Old Republic's political structure. Regional governors would now oversee territories directly without any pretense of democratic oversight. The destruction of Alderaan became one of the first demonstrations of the Death Star's power, though this was ordered by Tarkin rather than Palpatine directly. The Emperor had set the stage for such actions through his policies, and Tarkin chose Alderaan because it was home to Bail Organa, a known rebel sympathizer. The entire planet was annihilated in an instant, killing billions of innocent people as a warning to other worlds. Although Palpatine hadn't specifically chosen Alderaan as the target, he publicly endorsed this action afterward. Through his representatives, he announced that the planet had been secretly developing bioweapons for rebels and that its destruction was a necessary example. The true message was unmistakable to every system in the galaxy. The Emperor now possessed a weapon that could obliterate any world that defied him. Fear would keep local systems in line more effectively than any army or fleet ever could. Palpatine offered token gestures like resettling a handful of Alderaanian survivors, but these were pure propaganda designed to make the Empire appear merciful. The reality was that he had just demonstrated his willingness to commit genocide on a planetary scale. The dark side had finally achieved open dominion over the galaxy through a combination of military might, supernatural terror, and weapons of unimaginable destruction. The Emperor, who had once hidden his true nature behind political masks, now ruled through naked fear and the promise of annihilation for anyone who dared oppose him. Sometimes the greatest victory becomes the catalyst for your ultimate defeat. The destruction of Alderaan was about to transform scattered resistance groups into a galaxy-wide rebellion that would challenge everything Darth Sidious had built. The annihilation of an entire world shocked the galaxy in ways that Palpatine hadn't anticipated. Instead of terrorizing star systems into submission, Alderaan's destruction became a rallying cry for everyone who opposed Imperial rule. The Rebel Alliance gained more support in the aftermath of this horror than they had managed to gather in years of secret recruiting. Emperor Palpatine remained confident that the Death Star's terrifying power would crush any rebellion before it could gain real momentum. He and Tarkin devised a trap to lure the entire Rebel fleet into open battle where it could be destroyed in one decisive stroke. They allowed the Death Star plans to be stolen through a carefully orchestrated series of events involving Princess Leia Organa. The theft was actually coordinated by Vader, though the rebels had no idea they were walking into an Imperial trap. The stolen plans led the rebels directly to their base on Yavin 4, exactly as Palpatine had foreseen. In his mind, this was the perfect opportunity to wipe out the rebellion completely and demonstrate the futility of opposing his rule. Events at Yavin did not unfold as Sidious expected. The rebels launched a desperate assault on the Death Star that seemed doomed from the start. Imperial fighters and defensive systems should have easily repelled such a small attack force. But a young rebel pilot named Luke Skywalker managed to accomplish the impossible. Using the Force in ways he didn't fully understand, Luke fired proton torpedoes into a critical exhaust port that destroyed the entire battle station. This was the first major defeat the Empire had ever suffered. Tarkin died aboard the Death Star, while Vader barely escaped in his damaged TIE fighter. The Emperor's ultimate weapon was gone, along with the fear it was supposed to inspire. Palpatine was furious that his foresight had failed to prevent such a catastrophic loss. For decades, his ability to see the future had given him advantages over every enemy. Now, a farm boy from Tatooine had shattered his most important project. Yet the Emperor remained patient and quickly pivoted to new strategies. He immediately ordered construction of a second Death Star, this time with enhanced security and improvements that would prevent another lucky shot from destroying it. More importantly, Palpatine learned the identity of the pilot who had cost him so much. Luke Skywalker was the son of Anakin Skywalker, which made him both a grave threat and a potential opportunity for the Sith. The news was alarming because Luke was strong in the Force and could represent a new hope for rebuilding the Jedi Order. But it was also intriguing because the young man might be turned to the dark side and used to replace Vader as a more powerful apprentice. Sidious told Vader about this new enemy while making it clear that Luke either needed to be converted or eliminated. He also began subtly encouraging Vader's growing obsession with finding his son, setting the stage for a confrontation that would serve his purposes either way. Over the next 4 years, the war between the Empire and Rebellion escalated into the full-blown galactic civil war. Palpatine directed Imperial forces from afar, letting his generals and admirals handle most operations while maintaining his dark influence over major battles. During critical engagements, the Emperor would sometimes use battle meditation to strengthen Imperial forces through the Force. This ancient technique required intense concentration but could turn the tide of entire campaigns when properly applied. The Empire struck back hard after Yavin by raiding rebel bases and crushing dissidents wherever they could be found. But the rebellion also scored important victories that brought more star systems to their cause and proved that the Empire could be defeated. The discovery of the rebel base on Hoth led to another major Imperial victory, when Vader personally led the assault that scattered the Alliance from Echo Base. Although this was a tactical success, Luke Skywalker once again managed to escape capture. Vader then orchestrated a trap on Bespin by capturing Han Solo and using him as bait to lure Luke into a confrontation. The plan worked, But Luke rejected Vader's revelation of their relationship and escaped rather than join the dark side. When Palpatine learned that Vader had acted without consulting him, he was initially displeased, but recognized that his apprentice's failure revealed important information about Luke's growing power and potential. The confrontation convinced Palpatine that dealing with Luke Skywalker would require his personal involvement. The young Jedi was too strong and too important to be left to subordinates who might fail at the crucial moment. The second Death Star neared completion over the forest moon of Endor as Palpatine prepared for what he intended to be the final battle of the war. This time, he would personally oversee events to ensure that nothing went wrong. His plan was brilliantly conceived to eliminate multiple threats simultaneously. He allowed Bothan's spies to steal information suggesting that the new Death Star was only partially completed and lightly defended, hoping to lure the entire Rebel fleet into a trap. In reality, the battle station was fully operational ahead of schedule, with its super laser ready to destroy capital ships. The Imperial Navy lay in wait to ambush the rebels when they arrived, while ground forces prepared to crush any landing parties. Most importantly, Palpatine made sure that Luke's friends would be part of the strike team sent to disable the Death Star's shield generator. He was betting that Luke would come to protect them, delivering himself directly into the Emperor's hands. The Battle of Endor began exactly as Sidious had foreseen. The Rebel strike team managed to disable the shield generator, but not before the Imperial fleet revealed itself and trapped the Alliance forces between the Death Star and a wall of Star Destroyers. Palpatine allowed the Rebel fleet to approach the battle station before springing his trap. The Death Star's super laser began picking off Rebel capital ships one by one, while Imperial forces prevented any escape from the killing zone. Meanwhile, Luke had indeed come to Endor as predicted. He surrendered himself to Vader in a desperate attempt to turn his father back to the light, but Vader delivered him to the Emperor's throne room just as the trap required. The confrontation in the throne room became the climax of everything Palpatine had been working toward for decades. He intended to make Luke give in to anger and hatred, then replace Vader with a younger and more powerful apprentice. Sidious showed Luke the space battle raging outside while taunting him about the doom of his friends and the rebellion. He revealed that every aspect of the Rebel attack had been orchestrated by his design, proving his superiority over their pitiful resistance. As the battle intensified and Rebel losses mounted, Luke's emotions surged exactly as the Emperor wanted. When Palpatine threatened to destroy both the Rebel fleet and Endor itself, Luke finally snapped and tried to strike him down. Vader intercepted his son's attack, leading to a furious lightsaber duel, while Sidious watched with glee. Everything was converging perfectly as the rebels faced annihilation, and Luke descended toward the dark side through his hatred. Luke managed to defeat Vader in combat by severing his father's mechanical hand. But at the crucial moment, he controlled himself and refused to deliver the killing blow. Instead, he declared himself a Jedi and threw aside his lightsaber. This defiance infuriated Sidious, who realized that Luke's compassion was reawakening something in Vader that he had thought was buried forever. Rather than risk losing his apprentice, the Emperor decided to kill Luke immediately. The torture that followed was both punishment for Luke's defiance and a demonstration of the Emperor's true power. Palpatine unleashed Force lightning that caused agony beyond anything the young Jedi had ever experienced, savoring every moment of his victim's suffering. As Luke writhed under the electrical assault that was slowly killing him, something unexpected happened that the Emperor's arrogance had blinded him to. Vader's buried humanity finally resurfaced as Anakin Skywalker chose to save his son. The apprentice grabbed his master from behind in a move that caught Palpatine completely off guard. Enraged and panicking, Sidious continued hurling lightning in all directions while Vader lifted him toward the reactor shaft. Anakin's final act of redemption came as he hurled the Emperor down the shaft, though the effort mortally wounded him as dark side energy coursed through his damaged life support systems. Palpatine fell into the abyss while releasing a massive explosion of force power that rippled through the Death Star. The greatest Sith Lord in galactic history was finally destroyed as his body disintegrated in the reactor core. The spiritual shockwave of his death was felt by Force-sensitive beings across the galaxy as the dark side lost its most powerful champion. Within moments, the Rebel Alliance succeeded in destroying the second Death Star, completing their victory at Endor. With the Emperor dead and his superweapon obliterated, the tide of war turned decisively in favor of the rebellion. The Imperial fleet lost coordination and morale when Palpatine's presence vanished, as he may have been using battle meditation to strengthen his forces during the battle. Without his guidance, the surviving Imperial ships retreated in disarray. Pandemonium spread through Imperial ranks as news of the Emperor's death reached every corner of the galaxy. The Galactic Empire began fragmenting under competing warlords and officers who could never match Sidious's ability to maintain unity through fear and power. The galaxy erupted in celebration from Endor to Coruscant, where citizens toppled statues of the tyrant who had oppressed them for decades. Anakin Skywalker's sacrifice had fulfilled the prophecy of the Chosen One by destroying the Sith and bringing balance to the Force. Yet in the Legends timeline, Palpatine's story didn't end with his apparent death at Endor. The dark side was not finished with Sheev Palpatine, and his greatest challenge to the galaxy still lay ahead in the shadows of the deep core. Now, this is where the Legends timeline really picks up for Sidious. Death at the Battle of Endor was just the beginning of his story rather than the end, and the galaxy was about to discover that the dark side had prepared the ultimate contingency plan for its greatest champion. Unknown to anyone celebrating across the galaxy, Darth Sidious's spirit survived his plunge into the Death Star's reactor core. In that crucial moment of death, he called upon the most forbidden secrets of the ancient Sith and used the essence transfer technique to tear his consciousness free from his dying body. His non-corporeal spirit hurled itself across space at incredible speed, seeking the vessel he had prepared for exactly this possibility. Years before Endor, Sidious had cultivated a hidden facility on the remote deep core world of Byss, where clone bodies grown from his own genetic material waited in stasis. The Emperor's spirit streaked across the galaxy and successfully possessed one of these clone bodies, effectively resurrecting himself in a younger and healthier form. The transfer worked, but it came with serious complications that would plague him for years to come. Byss had been developed in complete secrecy during Palpatine's reign as Emperor, tucked away in the deep core where it was nearly impossible to reach without secret hyperspace routes. The planet became his ultimate backup plan for survival and revenge. The world itself had been transformed into a dark side nexus through rituals that would horrify civilized beings. Palpatine performed profane ceremonies that saturated the planet with malevolent force energy while creating a nexus that amplified his own powers. Most disturbing of all was how he had created this nexus. Millions of citizens had been lured to Byss through propaganda that promised them a paradise world where they could start new lives. Instead, they became unwitting fuel for Palpatine's dark experiments as their life energies were slowly drained to enhance his connection to the Force. On Byss, Palpatine had constructed a grand Imperial citadel that served as his second throne room. This fortress contained laboratories where his loyal Imperial sovereign protectors and dark side adepts worked to perfect the technologies that would ensure his immortality. By the time of Endor, dozens of Sparti cloning cylinders containing Palpatine's genetic duplicates were ready for use. His personal physicians and dark side scientists had overseen every aspect of the cloning process, encoding ancient Sith mantras into the procedures to make spirit transfer easier. This contingency plan was sometimes called Project Blackwing, or simply the Emperor's Immortality Project. It represented years of preparation for the possibility that his physical body might be destroyed before he could achieve natural immortality through other means. In the wake of Endor, the Empire was thrown into chaos as news of the Emperor's death spread. Some of his closest advisors tried to keep his demise secret, but infighting and power grabs quickly became rampant throughout Imperial ranks. Several self-proclaimed emperors and warlords carved out territories for themselves, while the legitimate government collapsed. Grand Vizier Sat Pestaj and Director Isan Izar were among those who tried to maintain central control, but their efforts largely failed. Despite the political chaos, the Imperial military remained formidable. The rebels, who now called themselves the New Republic, had to fight many hard battles against regrouped Imperial forces that refused to surrender even after losing their supreme leader. During this period, Grand Admiral Thrawn returned from the unknown regions and nearly succeeded in reuniting the Empire's scattered factions. His brilliant campaign against the New Republic came closer to victory than anyone realized, but Palpatine chose not to reveal himself during this time. The Emperor's clone body was still unstable, and he needed more time to perfect the transfer process. He may also have wanted to see if Thrawn could weaken the New Republic first, making his own eventual return even more devastating. Some sources suggest that Sidious considered Thrawn a useful pawn whose efforts could have been coordinated with his own plans. A simultaneous offensive by Thrawn from the unknown regions and Palpatine from the deep core might have crushed the New Republic completely. But fate intervened when Thrawn was killed at the Battle of Bilbringi, ending his campaign just as it seemed poised for ultimate success. His death removed a potential ally, but also eliminated someone who might have challenged Palpatine's authority if he had succeeded in restoring the Empire. During the years following Endor, Palpatine remained on Byss to recuperate and gather his strength. His clone body grew to full maturity, giving him the appearance of someone in his prime rather than the aged Emperor who had died above Endor. However, a serious problem became clear as he settled into his new form. The intense dark side power that Sidious wielded caused his clone bodies to age and deteriorate at an accelerated rate that made them unstable vessels for his essence. The flesh would wither and rot within only a few years if he poured his full power into it. This forced him to periodically transfer his spirit into fresh clones to prevent the decay from killing him again. But each transfer took a toll and carried the risk of complete failure. Palpatine eventually realized that his genetic samples had been corrupted in subtle ways. One of his own royal guards named Karna Jax had secretly sabotaged the latest batches of clones along with other elite conspirators, though this treachery wouldn't be fully exposed until later. While dealing with these physical limitations, Palpatine used his time on Byss to assemble a massive new Imperial war fleet in complete secrecy. He drew upon resources that had been hidden away during his original reign, commissioning new warships that surpassed anything the galaxy had seen before. The Eclipse-class superstar destroyer became his new flagship, an enormous vessel equipped with a super laser that could destroy capital ships with a single shot. This monster of engineering represented the pinnacle of Imperial shipbuilding technology enhanced by dark side knowledge. Even more terrifying was the Galaxy Gun, a hyperspace-capable weapon that could fire projectiles capable of destroying entire planets from anywhere in the galaxy. Unlike the Death Stars, which had to travel to their targets, the Galaxy Gun could strike from the safety of the deep core. He also perfected the World Devastator concept, creating enormous factory ships that could consume entire cities and fleets before forging new weapons from the raw materials. These self-replicating weapons of mass destruction represented a new form of warfare that could potentially consume entire star systems. Legions of dark side devotees flocked to Byss during this period, drawn by the Emperor's promise of power and the opportunity to serve the ultimate master of the Sith arts. 7 Dark Jedi, known as the Emperor's Dark Side Elite, became his primary lieutenants under the leadership of Executor Sidious. For several years, Palpatine watched from the shadows as the New Republic took control of Coruscant and the core worlds, while Imperial remnants retreated to the Outer Rim. He was patient, knowing that the right moment would come to reveal himself and reclaim his empire. Byss itself became an impregnable fortress, protected by massive naval facilities and energy siphon technology that could drag enemy ships out of hyperspace to their doom. The planet's dark side aura made it nearly impossible for Jedi to approach without being overwhelmed by the malevolent energy. The stage was set for Palpatine's grand return to galactic prominence. He had cheated death itself, assembled weapons that surpassed his previous achievements, and gathered followers who would die for the chance to serve him. All he needed was to choose the perfect moment to strike back at those who thought they had defeated him. The New Republic had no idea that their greatest enemy was not only alive, but stronger than ever. The Emperor, who had once ruled through fear and political manipulation, was about to return with powers and weapons that made his original reign seem restrained by comparison. Six years after his supposed death at Endor, the galaxy was about to learn that some nightmares refuse to stay buried. Emperor Palpatine broke his silence and launched the most devastating comeback in galactic history. The reborn Palpatine revealed himself to the galaxy in a youthful clone body that brimmed with dark side power beyond anything he had possessed in his original form. He transmitted messages across Imperial communication networks, proclaiming that the Emperor had returned to lead the Empire to final victory. Many war-weary Imperial factions rallied instantly to his call. Officers and soldiers who had been fighting a losing battle against the New Republic suddenly found renewed purpose and hope. Their true leader was alive, and he promised to restore the glory that had been stolen from them. Palpatine's forces emerged from the deep core like a storm that no one had seen coming. They attacked numerous New Republic worlds simultaneously, sowing panic throughout a government that thought the Imperial threat was finally under control. The Battle of Mon Calamari became one of the most devastating assaults of this new war. Palpatine deployed his world devastators to consume entire floating cities on the Mon Calamari oceans, turning their own infrastructure into weapons that would be used against them. The New Republic was stunned by both the Emperor's sudden reappearance and the horrifying power of these new weapons. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for factory ships that could eat planets and turn the wreckage into fresh instruments of destruction. Luke Skywalker felt Palpatine's dark presence surge across the galaxy like a wave of malevolent energy. The Jedi Knight realized the terrible truth that Darth Sidious was alive in clone form and represented a threat beyond anything the New Republic could handle through conventional warfare. Believing that he could not defeat the Emperor through normal military force, Luke made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He surrendered himself to Palpatine, much as his father had done years earlier, and vowed to serve the Emperor. Luke's plan was to learn Palpatine's secrets from within, while secretly working to undermine his power. But the young Jedi underestimated the seductive power of the dark side and how skilled Palpatine was at corrupting even the strongest opponents. Palpatine gladly welcomed Luke as his new apprentice and immediately began the process of turning him to the dark side. The Emperor saw multiple advantages in this arrangement, including the possibility of using Luke's powerful body as a future vessel for his spirit. Luke fell deeply under Sidious's influence as he delved into Sith teachings that promised power beyond anything the Jedi had ever shown him. As Supreme Commander of the Imperial forces, he led troops against the New Republic and came perilously close to being lost forever. However, the Skywalker bloodline would not be bent so easily to the will of the dark side. Luke's twin sister Leia sensed his plight through the Force and recognized that immediate action was needed to save both her brother and the galaxy. Leia was pregnant with her third child, Anakin Solo, but she bravely ventured to Palpatine's throne world on Byss alongside her husband Han Solo. The journey was incredibly dangerous, but she knew that Luke would be doomed without intervention from someone who loved him. The confrontation on Byss brought together all the major players in a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Leia's compassion and light side presence helped Luke break free from Palpatine's mental domination just when it seemed he might be lost forever. Together, Luke and Leia fought against Sidious in a battle that combined lightsaber combat with raw force power on a scale never seen before. The Emperor was enraged at losing his prize apprentice and unleashed the full fury of the dark side against the Skywalker twins. Palpatine summoned a cataclysmic force storm that ripped through hyperspace itself, creating a maelstrom of energy that threatened to annihilate the rebel fleet gathered near the pinnacle moon. This attack represented power that went beyond anything the Jedi had taught was possible. As the Force storm raged out of control, Leia and Luke united their abilities in desperation. They were bolstered by the luminous presence of Leia's unborn child, whose connection to the light side gave them strength they had never possessed individually. The combined power of the Skywalker family proved capable of turning Palpatine's own attack back against him. The massive Force storm was redirected to consume his flagship Eclipse while seemingly vaporizing the Emperor's clone body in the process. This victory marked the climax of the First Dark Empire confrontation as Palpatine's forces withdrew in confusion after losing their leader. For a moment, it appeared that the Emperor had been destroyed by the very dark side power he had tried to use as a weapon. But Darth Sidious's spirit endured yet again. The destruction of his clone body forced his essence to flee once more. though he briefly tried to possess Leia's unborn son before being repelled by the combined light of the Skywalkers. Instead, the Emperor's spirit returned to Byss and entered another clone body to continue his war against the New Republic. Over the next year, Palpatine struck back with Operation Shadowhand, a desperate final offensive designed to crush his enemies once and for all. Now more unstable and obsessed than ever, the Emperor emerged with a younger and more powerful clone body that allowed him to wield new strategies against his opponents. He deployed the Galaxy Gun to fire hyperspace-capable warheads that could obliterate planets from across the galaxy. He also rallied remaining Imperial loyalists in the core and deep core to launch simultaneous uprisings that briefly retook worlds like Coruscant during the chaos. Palpatine showed no restraint as multiple New Republic planets were devastated by Galaxy Gun strikes and World Devastator attacks. During this final campaign, Palpatine became increasingly erratic as each clone body continued to decay rapidly due to the sabotage that had corrupted his genetic samples. He hopped between clone hosts more frequently, with each transfer weakening his grip on sanity. The dark side elite, 7 Dark Jedi led by Executor Sidious, acted as Palpatine's primary enforcers during this period. They executed his battle plans while engaging Luke's nascent Jedi students in combat that tested the new generation of Force users. Luke and Leia worked together to counter Palpatine's moves, having learned from their previous encounter how to resist his power. In one showdown, the Emperor attempted to lure Luke back to the dark side by offering to resurrect Han Solo, not knowing that Han was actually still alive. Palpatine grew frustrated as the Skywalkers repeatedly foiled his schemes. His deteriorating mental state made him more desperate and unpredictable, leading to increasingly reckless decisions that exposed his forces to counterattacks. The end finally came on the planet Onderon, when Palpatine's last healthy clone body was killed during a confrontation with Han Solo and others on the moon Duxon. The Emperor's dying spirit frantically sought a new host before it could fade into oblivion. Leia's infant son, Anakin Solo, was on Onderon, representing a very powerful potential vessel that could sustain Sidious's essence indefinitely. In a terrifying moment, the Emperor's dark spirit hurled itself toward the baby in a desperate attempt to possess the child. But at that crucial instant, a dying Jedi named Empatogaios Brand intervened with a sacrifice that saved both the child and the galaxy. Brand had been mortally wounded by Palpatine earlier in the fight, but used his last strength to contain the Emperor's spirit within himself. The dying Jedi told Leia that he would carry the darkness with him into death, ensuring that Sidious could never escape to threaten anyone again. In a final blaze of light side energy, Brand died while taking Palpatine's malevolent spirit into the netherworld of the Force. Darth Sidious was finally and completely extinguished. The shadow that had terrorized the galaxy for decades was purged forever, prevented from any future resurrections through the ultimate sacrifice of a Jedi who gave everything to ensure evil could not triumph. Immediately afterward, the Emperor's remaining assets began collapsing like a house built on sand. His flagship Eclipse II was destroyed, while the Galaxy Gun misfired and obliterated Byss itself in a chain reaction that erased most of his hidden resources. The Galactic Empire splintered irrevocably without its Dark Sovereign to hold the competing factions together. Within weeks, warlords and counselors fell into civil war, while the Imperial remnant contracted to a fraction of its former territory. The New Republic stood victorious and began ushering in an era of peace that would last for generations. The prophecy of the Chosen One had finally been fulfilled completely, thanks to Anakin's descendants playing the crucial role in ending the Sith threat forever. The greatest comeback in galactic history had ended in the most complete defeat imaginable. Palpatine's genius for cheating death had finally met its match in the power of sacrifice and the unbreakable bonds between those who choose light over darkness. The death of the galaxy's greatest villain left a shadow that would stretch across centuries. Even in defeat, Darth Sidious had changed the course of history in ways that would echo through generations of heroes and villains who came after him. In the immediate aftermath of his final destruction, the empire that Palpatine had built over decades collapsed into chaos and infighting. Within a year of his demise, the once mighty Imperial war machine had fractured as various Moffs and warlords claimed authority over their own territories. None of these pretenders could hold the Empire together the way Sidious had. His personal will and supernatural presence had been the only thing keeping competing factions united under one banner. Without his dark influence binding them together, the Imperial system he designed simply could not sustain itself. By the time the formal Galactic Empire was forced into a peace treaty with the New Republic, it had shrunk to a small remnant hiding in the Outer Rim. This proved that Palpatine had been the linchpin holding everything together through sheer force of personality and power. Yet Palpatine's personal legend continued to fascinate and frighten long after his physical form was gone. The incredible abilities he had displayed cemented his place in history as arguably the most formidable dark side practitioner the galaxy had ever known. Future generations of Darksiders studied whatever records remained of Sidious's teachings. Luke Skywalker eventually recovered Palpatine's journals and manuals on the dark side, texts that were sometimes called the Book of Sith by those who knew of their existence. These writings provided insight into Sith alchemy, philosophy, and techniques that became both objects of caution and sources of knowledge for the new Jedi Order. Luke understood that studying evil was necessary to prevent it from rising again, even though the knowledge itself was dangerous. Some remnants of Palpatine's regime tried to use his image for their own purposes long after his death. A group called the Second Imperium created an artificial intelligence version of Palpatine to rally young Imperial cadets, though this deception was eventually uncovered by Luke's Jedi students. Several of Palpatine's former servants attempted to carry on his legacy in their own ways. The Emperor had trained many hands and adepts during his reign, and some of them continued pursuing dark side power even after losing their master. Mara Jade eventually rejected the dark path and became a Jedi, symbolically turning part of Sidious's legacy toward the light. Her marriage to Luke Skywalker represented the ultimate transformation of what the Emperor had intended as a weapon into a force for good. Another former agent, Lumia, tried to resurrect the Sith cause decades later. Her actions led to the corruption of Jacen Solo into Darth Sidious, proving that the vacuum left by Sidious created opportunities for new dark side threats to emerge. Yet even Lumia acknowledged that none could match Palpatine's mastery of the dark arts. His combination of political genius, supernatural power, and ruthless cunning represented a peak of Sith achievement that later Darksiders could only hope to imitate. In galactic historical memory, Palpatine became synonymous with the ultimate tyrant. His rise from Chancellor to Emperor served as a permanent warning about how freedom could be lost through the gradual erosion of democratic institutions. Planets that had suffered under Imperial rule commemorated Empire Day as a reminder of their hard-won liberty. What had once been a celebration of Palpatine's coronation became a day of reflection on the price of freedom and the vigilance required to protect it. Statues and portraits of Palpatine that once filled the core worlds were mostly destroyed or hidden after his fall. A few survived in museums as grim reminders of what unchecked ambition could accomplish when combined with supernatural power. The phrase, "by the Emperor's black bones," entered common usage as a curse, showing how deeply his reign had affected ordinary people across the galaxy. Even in death, his name carried weight that made it useful for expressing anger or frustration. Some of Palpatine's contingency planning may have influenced events far beyond his lifetime. Centuries after Endor, a Sith order called the One Sith emerged under Darth Krayt, building on ideas that Sidious had proven about unified dark side rule. The One Sith philosophy of a single all-powerful ruler echoed the success that Palpatine had achieved in nearly conquering the galaxy. His example showed that one Dark Lord with enough vision and power could dominate civilization itself. Even the ancient prophecy that had predicted a Sith who would rule forever without need of a successor seemed to point towards Sidious. Though he ultimately failed, he had come closer to achieving that ideal than any Darksider before or since. Sheev Palpatine's impact on galactic history was beyond measurement. He was the central figure in the fall of the Republic and the near extinction of the Jedi Order. His actions plunged the galaxy into war and tyranny, causing the deaths of trillions of beings. Yet from that crucible of suffering, the heroes of the Rebel Alliance arose to challenge his rule. The Jedi were reborn through Luke Skywalker's efforts, and balance was eventually restored to the Force through the sacrifices of those who refused to surrender to darkness. Luke later reflected that Palpatine had almost succeeded in extinguishing the light completely. The fact that he ultimately failed proved that even the greatest evil could be overcome by those willing to stand against it. Sidious's life and defeat became one of the galaxy's most enduring lessons about the eternal struggle between good and evil. His story showed that darkness would always rise to challenge the light, but it would never triumph as long as heroes were willing to fight back. Darth Sidious remains the benchmark against which all future tyrants and dark side users are measured. He was the personification of corruption and the ultimate cautionary tale about what happens when ambition knows no limits. His complete story in the Legends timeline reveals depths of evil and power that the simplified canon version only hints at. Where canon gives us a villain, Legends gives us the devil himself.